Welcome to the 21st Century Film Club, and to mark the Coronation, we'll be reviewing The King's Speech, which won Best Picture in 2011. So, Natasha, what did you think of the film?
I really enjoyed it. To say it's like what a lot of people's like comfort film, I got to admit I hadn't watched it until we were reviewing it here, but I did really enjoy it. I'm a big fan of Colin Firth, so I really liked that he was the lead, and I thought it was nice, like not all, like almost a biopic of like what like seemingly happened behind the scenes in the royal family back then.
Yes, it was behind the scenes. Yeah, it was really behind the scenes. I watched it years ago and I didn't think much of it, but this time I've really enjoyed it. And I think maybe that's because in the past 10 years, maybe we have been bombarded with so much royal news that they feel so close to us right now, because the royal family does often go through these periods of intense scrutiny and media attention. And I think we've had that with Meghan and Kate and the two boys getting married, and then also the Queen dying and now Charles becoming king. So for me, I felt like I knew so much more about the royals watching it this time than I was a child, because I didn't really grow up in really a royal family listening to much royal news, and I just don't think it was that much of a thing for us being like born in 2001. For us growing up, it kind of, the royals, it felt like they came from nowhere. But for the film itself, it was quite a fascinating period in history, and for its credit, you can't really say the royal family had no influence or impact on World War II. And I think this film made a very strong case for that with the broadcasts and the purpose of the royal family, which is the argument for royalists is that they are the unifying figure, that they can be the one. And I think that film really made a strong argument for that.
I think even just like showing them as the figureheads as well, like even though like Winston Churchill did appear in it, it was not for very long, and it was more showing the royals as being the figurehead of the country rather than like say like government officials, which I feel like now it almost feels like the government are like more, all the media eyes are more on them almost, like to make decisions and everything. But back then, even just showing the people's reactions to when he did the speech, like they all just like they listened because it was the royalty, and people seemed to show a lot more like respect for that.
Yes, no, people did show a lot more respect for the royal family, and they also showed a lot. They also showed a lot more. This is very British. This is the way that we do things in Britain. People, in the beginning, it opens in Wembley, and it's so austere, and it's. I think it was during the Great Depression as well, that 1930s clip, and it did feel like we have lost so much respect for the royal family. On the other hand, and that the way they were treated was above everyone else. And now I do think there's a sense of feeling, especially with Charles, finally, that the royals are like us. And I think this film, I watched a film, it was called, gosh, it was such a bad film. It had Helen Mirren in it, and it was basically the Queen. That's what it was called. It wasn't a great film at all. It was a TV movie. It was made a couple of years before The King's Speech, and that was all about when Diana died and the Queen's reaction to it. So this film definitely was influenced by this, because there's been many great plays about royalty, but I think this film succeeded on its own without the royal connection. It was just fun, enjoyable. I really liked the humour and all the drama exercises that happened between the two. Lionel, I think it was almost Lionel's character that saved the film.
Yeah.
Geoffrey Rush's acting, him being an Aussie, him being someone we didn't know about. If he wasn't in the film, it could have been quite dry, or like watching a history documentary. Yeah,
I feel like he sort of like probed Bertie, as it was, like to like act more, like to realise that, you know, he does have a voice and he needs to use it for the position that he's going to be in. And even like he almost like helped him allude to the point to know that like you will end up being the king, like with the situation with his brother and everything. Like I feel like he was needed there to sort of create the fire and keep like him feisty, almost to give him more drive to want to be able to like get over like the stamina and everything to be able to go and do these speeches. And even though at the end like it mentions that he was with him through all the speeches he had to do within the wartime, but like it shows that like he was needed to like keep motivating him and by persuading him to keep going, to keep the drive. And even though, yeah, he was still there throughout his speeches, like, I feel like they grew to respect each other a lot more, and that was shown like even from the start, the get-go, and he's like, we need to be equal in here, I want to be on like first name basis.
It's very revolutionary, that for its time, and we take it for granted that we call royals almost by their first names now, but back then it was really about the title, not about the person, and that was a big issue. I found it very interesting to hear about the psychological damaging upbringing of Bertie and the nanny and then his older brother and everything, and it did actually make me think twice about any kind of celebrity, a public figure who has grown up in the public eye, and kind of the traumas that we don't really know about and reasons why they have mental health problems or other issues. And I think that was it wasn't on purpose, but it reflected very much the royals we have now with their issues, and a lot of them have quite soap opera-like issues, let's say. It was interesting. I really liked Helena Bonham Carter as well. I think she was phenomenal in it. Colin Firth did win Best Actor for this, and I think he was incredible. The main thing for me was his eyes and how they were twinkling every single scene. I was very jealous. And his eyes were alive, raw, angry, anguish. He definitely went to many places in that role, and I didn't almost expect that, because you think very reserved, stuffy kind of acting, and we're like, oh, he's playing a gentleman, he's done it before. But actually his acting was one of the best male performances I've seen in ages. I think he did kind of blow a lot of the actors that we have today out the water.
Yeah, no, I feel like he's like a classic British actor now, but I feel like it almost is one of his defining roles that people know him for, because I feel like he suited the role really well. Like, even just thinking of other, like, say, British actors of a similar, like, age range, I feel like he would be the best suited for the role. Like, he did he could, like, have the moments of being, like, reserved or, like, more, like, quieter in a situation where you could tell he was feeling anxious or, like, apprehensive to have to do public speaking or anything like that. But he also had, like, the fire in him to be able to, like, stand up and be like, no, I have a voice. And, like, even just, like, the swearing scene, like, he had like the ability to be able to do all these different, like, emotions that were needed for the role.
I think it is. The swearing did surprise me, because I had watched it as a child and I never remembered there being that much swearing. And I remember this film as well becoming like a cultural phenomenon because of the scene with him putting on the music. And then if you watch Educating Yorkshire, they have a very similar scene where they literally copied that film and helped a guy amazingly with his stutter. And for me, I was like, wow, there's so much swearing in it. I thought it would, not that it was not for children, but I just always associated this film with childhood. And then at the very final speech, for the F word to be mouthed during the actual wartime speech. What was chilling for me about the film also was the real life footage they used of Herr Hitler in Europe.
Yeah.
And I did actually get a flashback of me watching this and being completely horrified as well. And this time it had just the same effect. I think it really just took my breath away, seeing all the Nazis in their rows and rows and rows of people, and then seeing the threat that Britain and the world and all the minorities in the world were under. It really just, it was from a different film, but the way they put it in the film with the footage reel of the royal family watching it, including the soon-to-be Queen Elizabeth II, I just found that an incredible touch of the film.
Yeah, no, I feel like it was, like, obviously, like, very, like, not sudden, but, like, sort of rawly, like, put in, but I feel like it needed to be to sort of give wider context, like, because obviously they're very, like, privileged, aristocratic family, but, like, and normally, like, in, say, a warish, like, themed film, you'd probably see, like, the common person and, like, maybe how they've been affected, or if they've had someone that's had to go off to war, whatever. But I feel like it was needed in this context to show, like, oh no, this is what's happening, like, real time, as he's having to go through his own journey of finding his voice to be able to assist, like, the motivation of the country to keep everyone going. And believing, even though they don't know what this uncertainty is and how long it's going to last for or anything.
Yes, it was an argument for the royal family as well, because they may be criticised for being boring, but they, in that period, George himself, we can't say the same about Wallis Simpson and Edward. They weren't radicals in either way. But the film, it kind of didn't touch upon Edward and Wallis Simpson's Nazi sympathies, which there's much evidence for this, in fact, like visiting Hitler and other things. It did kind of touch on it a little bit actually, but it didn't make a point about it. I quite liked that in one way, because it would have just distracted from the film. But I think, would I say this film was impartial about royalty? Not at all. I feel like they wanted Queen Elizabeth to watch this and go, oh, I love Colin Firth, and have a crush on him too. But I think I really enjoyed the way they handled the abdication too.
Yeah.
Because usually, if that was the entire plot of a film on the abdication, it's a story a lot of us know from history just by reading a book, basically.
Yeah.
But because it wasn't the main story, it was actually about Bertie, it became even more interesting and even more juicy. It could have been a Lifetime movie if it was about, oh, Wallis and Edward, you know, falling in love.
Yeah.
And Madonna did do a film about that relationship, which was completely panned, because it isn't something you should glorify. And I do take a strong moral point of view with this, that you shouldn't glorify people who are Nazi sympathisers, or I'd rather glorify the boring people like Bertie and the Queen Mother Liz.
Yeah. Even like when his wife was like saying, she even made a comment to like Winston, I think, about like the whole situation, and like it was sort of a thing that they were all sort of like everyone was sort of discussing it. You could tell like that was like the big like controversy back then of the royal family, and it was just sort of interesting to see how they handled it now, to say how they handle it like in our time currently, like with the coronation, who's attending and everything like that.
It is better to be boring in the royal family. It is, you'll just get further and further along. If you're like a flash in the pan otherwise. To say with the royalty, I guess the other thing is we have to be careful who our monarch is. You have to have the character. And that's what a lot of critics of Prince Harry say at the moment. Oh, we're happy it's going to William, the heir, and not the spare. And it is very interesting to see that dynamic play out decades before, and it will play out probably
in future,
decades
to
come.
Yeah.
And it is kind of that never-ending soap opera. But I think for one moment during the war, I think a lot of people agree it's a high point in overall for the royal family, World War II, like something they should be more proud of because of a broadcast. And then in peacetime, it's more personal taste.
Yeah, I feel like they're watched a lot more in times of uncertainty or like tragedy. Like I know nowadays it might be more like an older generation that would look to them, but back then I think it would have, like anyone of any age would have looked to the royal family for an answer or for some sort of reassurance. And I feel like they depicted that really well throughout the film, that like like you could tell when he was like upset, like he had like almost the whole country's weight on his shoulders, and he felt like he had not a burden, but like with having the struggles, it felt a lot more like almost, it is sort of like a burden for him, but it was more of a prominent issue for him because he had all these eyes on him, all these ears wanting to hear from him about what they should do, like
just
how they should feel.
Focus on him, and he seems very introverted and shy, even without his stutter. He seems to be more like a homebody. And I think that's the great dilemma of politicians and royalty, is that they have to have these great principles and intelligence, but then they have to be photogenic and be well with the cameras and speak well. And people who spring to mind are like Hillary Clinton, other politicians who are very criticised for the media performance, but we don't know what they're really like. And then we also have politicians who are considered quite charismatic, like Boris Johnson, and we don't know what they're like either behind closed doors. And it was very interesting to see the very seeds of this with the wireless, and then you see, as they very eloquently said by I think it was King George V, the father who died, you know, now they have to be in everyone's living home. They're not good enough to be in a painting. And I do think that is sad.
Yeah.
And as much as I think we all like broadcasting, we do have to admit there's so many downsides to about character integrity of having everything filmed and having to be media savvy and media ready. It's a shame, I think.
Yeah, I think it almost holds everyone accountable for everything they do or say now. But I feel like even back then, like even just the change in them all, like having to do like different like procedures before they could even go live on the wireless, like there was so much for them to then start having to think about now, whereas like prior to that it wouldn't have been such a big thing that they had to go and do broadcast because it wasn't a thing.
It was male only.
Yeah.
RP, or even more posh than RP, whatever the accent the king had, I really couldn't describe it. And the royals have a kind of own accent, it is said. But for them, it was wireless was very exclusionary. It was just the BBC. It was very formulaic, scripted, staged. And now we have so much more diversity in the world of the media, which is a good thing, because even the Queen, you saw her accent become more and more normal as the years went on, naturally and also artificially, you know, to be relatable to people. And the byproduct of that is you have Charles, who really doesn't feel to me like a king who is stuffy or above. For whatever you can say about him, he is not like Bertie.
No.
Not at all. For them to go from Bertie to his grandson, they're completely different people, you know, in the way they handle things.
Yeah. I feel like now they're almost sort of, they keep saying they want to take like a step back as the royal family, things like that, but I feel like even just this film itself shows that like that can't be possible for the people they are in, like our society. Like even the coronation that's happening now, like there's still so many people that are going out to celebrate, having street parties, going down to London to try and like catch a glimpse of it. Like they are like they've always become like the celebrity now, and like more so than like the figurehead that they all turn to, say in this film, for like guidance on this like unknown war situation they're about to enter. But now I feel like they're more of like a celebrity. They get reported on more that way, rather than they would in the broadcast. Like everybody quiets the king's speech.
They completely are, and there's the negative side of that, which is all the criticism. Film that you should rewatch again, actually. Yeah, it's as simple as that. You should rewatch again. If you're like me and you have watched it years ago, it is a good thing to mark the coronation with. It will make you think of it more. It is crazy to think that there could be an Oscar-winning film about Harry and Meghan and everything in the future. But it's what I like about this film is the history, and I enjoy learning about history. And I think with that inclusion of Herr Hitler and the plot of World War II, and the very charismatic performance by Lionel. It had 3 amazing performances, Colin Firth, Helena Bonham Carter, Geoffrey Rush. Those 3 were amazing. And it wasn't a TV movie. I watched ages ago The Iron Lady with Meryl Streep in it, and she had a lot of voice work to sound like the Iron Lady. And her performance was good, and it did win Best Actress. But to me, the whole film was like a cheap TV movie. It was a pretty lousy movie. And also her acting was lost in the accent and the way she was speaking. And I think that is because she's an American, ultimately. But Colin Firth, on the other hand, I think his best actor performance was just miles and miles better than Meryl Streep, who is considered like the greatest actor of all time. So I think that's a real testament to Colin Firth, that in a similar type of meaty historical role, Colin, because of his eyes, because of his physicality and his anger, and just his characterization of someone who's a bit fussy, who's a bit like introverted, he was real. He felt like a real king, and I was worried that it would become too much of an acting through accents and speech, because it is about broadcast, it is about radio. But I think Colin Firth completely better than Meryl Streep in a similar historical role.
And I feel like even if you like just took the acting out of it, like I feel like you'd know a lot more, like say about the Iron Lady situation, because there was more media around that. Whereas this, the most we knew about this, for me anyway, was like history books growing up in school. Like you didn't really have like radio reports or broadcast or like even they probably would have had a lot in the news about this happening, because it almost seemed like it was something happening in-house that they were trying to sort out so that the public weren't made aware, so that they'd respect him more as a king, almost like not the divine right of kings, but trying to make sure that people definitely respected
their backs in power, and they used to do that to presidents, and now they don't anymore. You know, it is that dramatic societal shift from the sex revolution in the 1960s onwards that we had deference to free-for-all Wild West, and it's exciting. It is exciting to think about, and it is important to look back and that era when things were still intact, establishment. But it is bad for Lionel, because he never really became an actor because of prejudice against his own accent, which I totally forgot about. And I thought that was a very interesting way they did the film, that he's promoting and supporting the establishment, but the establishment never really backed him, or society never backed people like him who are immigrants. And I think that's something a lot of classic films have, that trope of an immigrant or an outsider helping the inside of the establishment person become more relatable. And then what does the immigrant group or the outsider group get from that? They don't really get anything from it. They just they help someone else's journey. Yeah.
It's like even when he was like asking like, how can I ever repay you? And he was like, or like, you know, like alluding to like a knighthood type thing. Like he was like, he just wanted like something, because like they were like basically saying that he didn't get the role because of like how he sounded. But then it's just kind of ironic, because he's helping the king deliver all these speeches, and he's like the workings behind that.
And it's his modernity, it's his attention to science and psychology. He was speaking about World War I and the shell-shocked soldiers. It's because of people like him who are truly innovative that Britain is a great country. And, you know, I think it's the scientists, the artists, the creatives who make Britain move ahead and, you know, get ahead, whether it's with the COVID vaccine or other things. And that is an important thing to be patriotic about. So to speak about patriotism, I think we do need to be patriotic about people who contribute to the culture and science of Great Britain, like he did with speech therapy and helping other people. And I guess that's where the royals would argue they shine a light on these things. But I think it's very interesting, like this discussion where we've got to now, because I think that is the way the royal family has changed. In the past, it wasn't their job to promote causes, but now it is, and I do prefer that. I think most do.
I feel like have got, obviously they're not having to like work like say a 9 to 5 or like, you know, but they have got a lot more of a working role than they would have back then. Like I feel like now all members of the royal family, even ones that like aren't in line for the throne, they've got like roles to do and organisations to sort of shine a light on or be patrons of and stuff like that. Like I feel like they've all had to take on more of an active role in promoting like other stuff that's happening around the UK, rather than just like fitted this mould and standing on a balcony and waving and things like that.
It is about like fitting the mould, and it is sad because there's so much more to people than fitting the mould. If that's like your aspiration in life is just to fit an ideal and not really help other people, then it is very shallow. It is terribly shallow. And it was an interesting way that the film ended with them also in the mould like it started. So it started with them in a mould where it was a bit old-fashioned, but then the royal family's just reinvented itself and twisted, and now they're on the balcony in a new role. It never was boring.
No.
It never was boring, and because the acting in that is Helena Bonham Carter, she really wasn't herself.
No.
She really was not herself. It was incredible. I'm very impressed, and I don't know, it might not make you patriotic, but if you haven't watched it, you really should watch it.
Oh, it's definitely worth a watch. Yeah.
Thank you for watching the 21st Century Film Club.